awaken your spirit, chosen ones. Insecurity doesn't whisper, it performs. That sentence alone explains more human behavior than most people are ready to admit, because the loudest flex in the room is rarely confidence. It's fear dressed up in celebration. And when someone goes out of their way to make you jealous, that's not power on display. That's panic leaking through polish. Here's a fact most people overlook. Psychologists have long noted that people who constantly highlight their wins around specific individuals are often reacting to an internal comparison threat, not external competition. In simple terms, they're not celebrating their success. They're trying to quiet a voice in their head that keeps saying, "What if I'm still not enough?" And unfortunately for them, you happened to be standing nearby when that voice got loud. What makes this situation almost comical is the miscalculation. They assumed you were watching. They assumed you were measuring. They assumed you wanted what they had. Meanwhile, you were busy living, growing, and minding your own lane, completely unaware you'd been cast as the main character in a one-sided performance. That's the funny part. You didn't audition, but you still got the role. There's something oddly revealing about people who weaponize success. The cars get shinier. The laughter gets louder. The stories get exaggerated. The timing becomes suspiciously perfect. None of it is accidental. When someone needs you to see them winning, it's because they're unsure the win stands without witnesses. And when the reaction they were fishing for never comes, what's left is uncomfortable truth and a little embarrassment. This isn't a story about envy. It's a story about exposure. Because in trying to provoke jealousy, people often end up spotlighting their own fears, insecurities, and emotional hunger. What was meant to rattle you quietly turned into a public confession. And once you learn how to recognize that pattern, you'll never see flexing the same way again. So stay with me, because what they thought was a power move accidentally became the clearest mirror they never meant to hold up. Number 1, they mistook your neutrality for envy, which already revealed how deeply they fear being irrelevant. The moment someone assumes your calm is jealousy, they've already told on themselves. Neutrality is dangerous to insecure people because it gives them nothing to work with. No praise, no competition, no resistance, just silence. Not the dramatic kind, but the natural kind that comes from not being invested. And that kind of neutrality doesn't feel peaceful to them. It feels like erasure. People who are secure don't scan rooms for reactions. They don't watch faces to see if their success landed. They don't replay conversations in their head, wondering if you noticed. When someone believes you must be jealous simply because you didn't react, it means they rely on emotional feedback to confirm their importance. Your lack of response short-circuited that system. What really happened is this: they expected comparison. They expected admiration, irritation, or at least curiosity. When none of that showed up, their mind filled in the gap with envy, because that explanation protects their ego. Saying they're jealous is easier than admitting, maybe I didn't move them at all. Indifference feels worse than rejection to someone who needs to feel significant. That's why neutrality gets misread so often. To a grounded person, it's just emotional balance. To an insecure person, it feels like a threat. It raises uncomfortable questions they don't want to sit with. Am I impressive? Does this matter? Am I actually doing well, or do I just look like it? Your calm presence forced those questions without you saying a word. There's also a quiet fear underneath it all. Irrelevance. Not being talked about. Not being noticed. Not being measured against. When you didn't engage, it felt like being removed from the scoreboard entirely. And that's terrifying to someone whose identity depends on comparison. So when they labeled you as jealous, it wasn't an observation. It was self-defense, a way to regain emotional control, a way to put you back into a role that makes sense to them. But the truth stayed exposed. You weren't neutral because you were suppressing envy. You were neutral because their performance didn't require a response, and that realization hit them harder than any reaction ever could. Number 2. They showcased what they had because they were unsure it was enough. When someone keeps putting what they own, what they've achieved, or who they're connected to right in your face, it's rarely about pride. It's about doubt. Real satisfaction is quiet. It settles in the body and doesn't need backup. But when a person isn't convinced they've done enough or become enough, they start collecting proof and displaying it like receipts. Not for celebration, but for reassurance. What looks like confidence is often self-checking. They show you the upgrade, the opportunity, the status shift, not because it excites them, but because they need confirmation that it counts. And the more they repeat it, the more obvious it becomes that the feeling didn't stick the first time. If it truly filled the gap they hoped it would, they wouldn't need to keep pointing at it. There's a subtle panic underneath all of this, a fear that without visible markers, they might be overlooked, that their progress might not be real unless someone else acknowledges it. So, they perform success instead of experiencing it. They talk about it louder than they live in it. That's why it often feels forced, timed, or oddly placed. It's not flowing. It's presented. What makes this uncomfortable for them is your lack of reaction. When you don't respond with envy or awe, it shakes the entire setup. Because your reaction was supposed to seal the deal. It was supposed to turn their effort into validation. Without it, they're left alone with the question they were trying to avoid. If no one reacts, does this still matter? The truth is, they weren't trying to make you feel small. They were trying to feel solid. They weren't competing with you as much as they were negotiating with their own insecurity. The showcasing was a conversation they were having with themselves, and you were just the audience they picked. That's why it never lands the way they expect. Because success used as a shield eventually gets heavy, and when it doesn't earn the reaction they hoped for, it exposes the truth they were trying to hide, that what they have looks impressive, but it hasn't fully convinced them yet. Number 3, they measured their worth against your potential, not their reality. The most dangerous type of jealousy isn't about what you've done, it's about what you could do. That's exactly what was happening here. They weren't comparing achievements, possessions, or status. They were measuring themselves against a projection of your future. And that's terrifying, because you can't control potential. Potential is unlimited. Potential isn't earned, it's simply inherent. And when someone sees that in you, their own sense of adequacy crumbles silently behind the mask of bravado. They acted like they were trying to make you envious, but the truth was far messier. Every carefully timed story, every highlighted success, every subtle brag was designed not to outshine you in the present, but to intimidate you in the imagined future. They were preemptively trying to secure a psychological foothold against a version of you they hadn't even met yet. That's why their attempts felt frantic, over-engineered, and oddly pointed. They were negotiating with a possibility, not reality. What makes this so revealing is the insecurity it exposes. They can't find peace with their own accomplishments because their self-worth is constantly under siege from the idea of someone else surpassing them. It's not about envy for what exists. It's fear of what might exist, fear of being left behind and fear of being exposed as small in a world where you might grow bigger than them. The irony is brutal. They try to make you react to feel powerful, but their real reaction is internal, invisible, and completely uncontrollable by anyone else. This is why their performance always overcompensates. They need loud victories, repeated flexes, and constant reminders of what they've earned, because their mind is already racing ahead, measuring itself against your unshaped, untested potential. And the more neutral or indifferent you remain, the more their effort exposes their deepest insecurity, that they are terrified of the idea that someday, somehow, your potential could make them feel irrelevant. In trying to control your reaction, they unwittingly revealed the truth about themselves. The fear of being overshadowed is louder than any boast, and your calm presence made that fear impossible to hide. Number 4, they revealed that validation, not success, is their real addiction. What most people don't see is that some achievements aren't about winning, they're about applause. They need a witness to tell them, yes, that counts. Yes, that's impressive. True success doesn't demand commentary. It exists quietly, and its weight carries itself. But when someone goes out of their way to provoke jealousy, to showcase their life, it isn't because they're proud. It's because they're addicted to validation. Every like, glance, or subtle reaction acts like a hit of reassurance that temporarily quiets the insecurity bubbling underneath. This addiction is invisible to them, but obvious to anyone watching closely. They don't just want recognition, they crave it. They need it to feel alive in their own story. That's why their timing is so deliberate, why every post, story, or brag feels rehearsed. Every step is meant to pull a reaction from you, to confirm in the simplest terms that they are relevant and seen. Without it, their accomplishments feel hollow, and their identity feels shaky. The irony is brutal. The more they chase validation, the more exposed they become. What they intended as a power move, something that should make you envious or unsettled, backfires because it shines a light on their insecurity. Instead of proving themselves, they reveal how fragile their confidence really is. The jealousy bait becomes a mirror, reflecting exactly how much they rely on others to feel worthwhile. Even subtle attempts at flexing, small name drops, or casual mentions of "look at what I've done," are not statements of pride. They're desperate attempts to silence the inner voice that constantly whispers, "Am I enough? Do I matter?" And when you don't react, that whisper grows louder. Your neutrality doesn't diminish them. It amplifies the truth they were trying to hide. So, in the end, their so-called success isn't the story. The real story is the addiction beneath it, the constant need for confirmation, the fear of being unseen, the fragile ego that can't survive without witnesses. That's what jealousy attempts truly reveal. Number 5. They exposed how fragile their self-image is under comparison. Self-image is supposed to be quiet, stable, something you carry without needing constant proof. But when someone tries to make you jealous, it shows just how shaky theirs really is. The moment they put on that display, it isn't confidence, it's desperation. Every highlight, every brag, every carefully timed story is a patch over a self-image that can't survive scrutiny. They need to see themselves reflected in someone else's reaction, and when that reflection doesn't appear, cracks start showing immediately. What they fail to realize is that the act of comparison only magnifies their weakness. By trying to provoke jealousy, they put their self-image under a microscope, forcing it to perform under pressure. And when it wobbles, which it inevitably does, it exposes the truth they've been hiding. They're not as steady, as secure, or as untouchable as they want the world to believe. Their identity is like a house built on sand. It looks solid from afar, but every glance, every reaction, every moment you don't respond, reveals the gaps inside. Fragile self-image thrives on control. They hope that by manipulating emotions, yours specifically, they can maintain a sense of superiority. But that illusion collapses the second their attempt fails. Your lack of jealousy is like a mirror they didn't want to look into. It shows them they aren't in control. It shows them that the image they've carefully constructed depends entirely on external validation. And that dependence is what makes the cracks so visible. The deeper truth is even harsher. They're constantly measuring themselves against others because they haven't learned to measure against themselves. Their confidence is borrowed from appearances, borrowed from approval, borrowed from reactions. That's why every display of supposed pride is also a silent confession. They are terrified of being seen for who they really are, without the props, without the hype, without the comparison. So when they tried to make you jealous, they didn't just fail, they revealed their fragility in full. Their self-image isn't the armor they thought it was. It's the reason they act like they need you to react, and why the truth of their insecurity now sits fully exposed for anyone paying attention. Number 6, they showed they study you more than you study them. When someone goes out of their way to provoke jealousy, it's never random. Every flex, every timing, every story is calculated, and that calculation reveals a hidden truth. They've been paying more attention to you than you've been paying to them. People who are secure don't obsess over how others perceive them. They don't rehearse reactions or craft subtle attempts to manipulate emotions. But someone trying to spark envy? They've been analyzing your patterns, your responses, even your silence, like a student taking notes for the final exam. It's almost comical if you think about it. They assume the role of puppeteer while underestimating the simplest fact. The puppet doesn't have to dance. They've invested time and energy in studying your habits, your likely reactions, your emotional triggers, as if your attention were a currency they could collect. And the more they watch, the more they reveal their own weaknesses. Their obsession becomes the clearest proof that their self-worth depends on your perception, not on their own sense of accomplishment. This over-analysis exposes the depth of their insecurity. They are constantly running mental simulations of how you'll respond, overthinking every potential interaction. The stories they post, the subtle brags, even the timing of their actions, they're all evidence of someone trying to control a narrative they can't actually control, and your indifference shatters that narrative. Every moment you don't react is a reminder that the attention they've given you is one-sided, and that all the study, all the planning, was ultimately about managing their own fear, not about influencing you. The irony is brutal. By trying to manipulate your emotions, they reveal how much your presence already occupies their mind. Their obsession speaks louder than any boast ever could. They are, in a way, trapped by you, not because you did anything, but because they've invested so much mental energy trying to manage your perception. And while they assumed the spotlight would be theirs, the reality is that the effort exposes the truth. They've been living inside your mind far more than you've been aware of, and that revelation alone is enough to strip all their carefully staged bravado of its power. Number 7. They unintentionally confirmed that you were never competing in the same game. When someone tries to provoke jealousy, they're assuming the playing field is shared. They think your reactions, your emotions, and your attention are part of the game they're controlling. But what they reveal in the process is far more telling. You were never even playing the same game. While they were busy collecting reactions, measuring responses, and orchestrating envy, you were living life on your own terms, following your own rhythm, and focusing on your own growth. Their attempts are loud, frantic, and overly calculated because their game is reactive. Yours, meanwhile, is proactive, intentional, and invisible to anyone who isn't paying close attention. This mismatch exposes the depth of their insecurity. They assume that because you exist in the same space, the same timeline, or even the same social circle, your life is automatically comparable to theirs. But your priorities, your focus, and your values operate on an entirely different axis. You don't need to validate yourself through competition with them, and you certainly don't measure your success through their reactions. And that is precisely what unsettles them. The louder they try to get you to react, the more obvious it becomes that you aren't invested in their narrative, and that alone undermines all their calculated efforts. Their miscalculation is also a window into how they think. Small arenas, short-term victories, and immediate feedback loops define their entire strategy. They want instant acknowledgement, immediate proof, and visible superiority. You, however, aren't playing to prove anything to anyone. Your victories, your growth, and your momentum are long-term, subtle, and steady. They can't see it, so they try to force visibility, assuming visibility equals relevance. In trying to pull you into their game, they inadvertently revealed the gap between your worlds. You weren't distracted by their theatrics because your focus is unshakable, and that realization hits harder than any jealous tactic could. Their attempts, meant to control or intimidate, only confirmed one undeniable truth. You're on a completely different plane, and the rules they rely on to manipulate people simply don't apply to you. Number 8. They told on themselves by assuming you wanted what they had. When someone assumes you're jealous, the first thing they reveal is that they believe their life is the standard by which everyone else measures worth. Every story, every flex, every brag is built on the assumption that what excites them should excite you, that what satisfies them should satisfy you, that what they've achieved automatically translates into envy. That assumption isn't harmless. It's a window straight into their mindset. It shows that they define success in the narrowest possible way, using their possessions, accomplishments, or social capital as proof of superiority. And the moment they try to drag you into that proof, they expose exactly how small their definition of value really is. This is the subtle, almost funny trap of jealousy attempts. They only succeed in revealing the projection. They're convinced that you must want what they have, when in reality you might not even care. Your standards, goals, and motivations are on a completely different wavelength, and that disconnect is the thing that frightens them the most. They can't see beyond their own lens, so they interpret your neutrality or indifference as envy. That misreading is the confession, the unintentional admission that their sense of importance is tied entirely to whether others covet what they possess. The irony is brutal. In trying to provoke a reaction, they show that they believe life is zero-sum. If someone else isn't impressed or envious, then somehow they haven't won. They fail to realize that your value and satisfaction don't hinge on comparison. That truth is invisible to them until your calm presence refuses to play the role they've scripted. Their plan backfires because the very thing they hope to manipulate, your reaction, was never a factor in your life. Ultimately, the assumption that you want what they have is what exposes them. It's a psychological slip, a self-reveal. They thought they were in control of the narrative, but in reality, their need to project envy onto you shone a spotlight on their own insecurity. By believing that your desires mirrored theirs, they told the world more about themselves than they ever intended, and in doing so they became far more transparent than any boast ever could. Number 9. They revealed that attention is their currency, not integrity. When someone goes out of their way to make you jealous, what they're really showing is what drives them, not character, not skill, not quiet accomplishment, but attention. Every carefully staged post, every timed story, every subtle brag is a transaction in their mind, a way of buying relevance in the currency that matters most to them. They aren't interested in living well for the sake of living well. They are focused on being seen, being noticed, being acknowledged. The reaction they hope to provoke isn't admiration. It's proof that they exist in your world on their terms. This fixation on attention exposes something deeper. Their values are performative. The achievements themselves are almost secondary. What matters is the optics, the narrative, the audience. When someone constantly seeks validation through your reaction, they're not demonstrating excellence. They're trading integrity for influence. They want to control perception rather than cultivating substance. Every jealousy attempt becomes a spotlight on that truth. What's fascinating is how transparent it becomes when the tactic fails. You don't react, and suddenly all the power they thought they had disappears. Their currency collapses because it was never real strength. It was borrowed from other people's responses. The more they try to force attention, the more the lack of control exposes their dependency. It's a delicate, almost comedic irony. They set up a stage to dominate, and your neutrality tears the whole illusion apart. Attention as currency also explains the desperation behind their actions. Unlike integrity, which is internal and self-sustaining, attention must be earned repeatedly, and it's never guaranteed. That's why their efforts are frantic, repetitive, and often over the top. They need the emotional deposit from others to feel rich, but no amount of display ever actually fills the gap inside. So when they tried to make you jealous, they weren't attempting a power move. They were revealing their true economy, a life measured by who notices, who reacts, and who validates. And in that exposure, the real lesson is obvious. Attention is fleeting, reactions are optional, and integrity, something they lack, cannot be manufactured or borrowed. Number 10, they exposed how threatened they are by your restraint. Restraint is unsettling to insecure people. When you don't react, when you stay calm and composed, it's like holding up a mirror to them that they weren't prepared to see. They try to provoke jealousy because they assume your emotions will confirm their importance, but the moment you remain steady, their carefully constructed power crumbles. Your restraint becomes a silent statement that cannot be controlled, manipulated, or bought, and that truth terrifies them more than any confrontation ever could. Their attempts to make you react reveal the depth of this fear. Every flex, story, or boast is timed and calculated to force an emotional response, because they think control is only valid when you participate in their narrative. They fail to realize that true influence doesn't need to coerce. It's earned through presence, character, and action. Your lack of response exposes the fact that their power is conditional, dependent entirely on your reaction. The calm you maintain isn't passive. It's a subtle, quiet dominance that they cannot handle. What's fascinating is how this threat to them escalates their behavior. The more composed you remain, the louder and more desperate their attempts become. It's not about you, it's about the insecurity their own restraint, or lack thereof, cannot conceal. They overcompensate because your quiet signals something they cannot achieve: stability, self-control, and the confidence to exist outside their influence. Every exaggerated display of success, every petty jab, every boast is a reaction to the pressure your restraint places on them. They're forced to confront themselves in ways they've avoided, and that confrontation is raw and uncomfortable. Ultimately, your restraint unmasks them. It reveals that their emotional state is fragile, that their sense of self is tied to external validation, and that they cannot survive the truth of someone who is grounded, unmoved, and unbothered. By choosing not to react, you don't just resist manipulation, you expose the fragility of a person who thought they could provoke, but instead only revealed themselves. Your calm isn't weakness. It's the quiet proof that their attempts at control are powerless. Number 11. They showed that they believe worth must be proven, not embodied. Some people think value is something you demonstrate, not something you inherently carry. That's exactly what happens when someone tries to make you jealous. Every post, every highlight, every carefully timed display isn't just a flex. It's a declaration that their worth depends on approval, comparison, and acknowledgement. They operate as if the world is a scoreboard, and the only way to feel validated is to keep proving they're winning. That mindset exposes more than ambition. it exposes insecurity. True worth doesn't need to be announced. It exists quietly in the way a person moves, decides, and lives their life. When they feel compelled to prove it, they're admitting to themselves, and everyone watching, that their internal sense of value is unstable. The act of trying to provoke jealousy is a perfect example. They hope your reaction will confirm their significance, as if a single glance, like, or comment could cement a sense of self that should already be unshakable. But the need for external proof reveals a fragile foundation. Every showy display, every story meant to elicit envy, every mention of success is actually a silent confession. They don't trust that they matter unless others acknowledge it. And the more they try, the more obvious it becomes to anyone paying attention. This belief in proving worth also shows a limited understanding of life. They assume that perception defines reality, that recognition equals relevance, and that envy validates excellence. In reality, the most powerful lives are lived quietly, internally, and without the constant need for applause. Your lack of reaction undermines their entire system, exposing the emptiness behind the spectacle. Ultimately, their attempts to manufacture jealousy reveal that they are trapped in a loop of external validation. They think worth is something to be earned and demonstrated rather than something to be embodied and lived. That revelation is unavoidable. In trying to make you react, they've shown that their confidence is conditional, their pride performative, and their self-worth dependent on anyone who happens to notice. Your indifference becomes the clearest mirror of all. Number 12. They accidentally highlighted how much control they don't have over you. The biggest irony in attempts to provoke jealousy is that they're often meant to assert power, but they end up exposing the opposite: a complete lack of control. Every post, every story, every carefully placed brag is built on the assumption that you will react the way they expect. They believe that by manipulating appearances, orchestrating moments, and showcasing what they think matters, they can bend your emotions to their will. But your calm, composed response, or lack of one, shatters that illusion instantly. The very thing they thought would prove influence only confirms how powerless they really are. Control is the silent desire behind most jealousy attempts. They aren't just showing off, they're trying to predict your reaction, to script the way you feel, to force an emotional response that validates their importance. The more they engineer the situation, the more obvious it becomes that your inner world is untouchable. Their strategy depends entirely on your participation, and the moment you refuse to play, all their effort collapses. That's why their attempts often look overdone, desperate, or strangely frantic. They are clinging to a control they can't actually claim. What's fascinating is how revealing this is about their character. The more they push, the clearer it becomes that their confidence is borrowed, their influence conditional, and their pride performative. They depend on others' reactions to feel alive in their own story, which makes their attempted power plays almost comical when met with indifference. Your lack of engagement becomes a silent but undeniable truth. Real influence can't be demanded. It can only be earned, and it can never be forced. By trying to manipulate you, they've given themselves away. Their need for control, their reliance on reaction, and their obsession with validation are all laid bare. What was supposed to be a display of superiority instead becomes a confession of helplessness. Your unshakable stance isn't just resistance. It's proof that no matter how much they try, they can't steer your emotions, your thoughts, or your peace of mind. And that truth hits harder than any act of envy could ever intend. Number 13. They revealed their fear of being seen without the extras. When someone tries to make you jealous, what they're really exposing is a deep, unspoken fear. The fear of being seen as ordinary, incomplete, or unremarkable without all the extras they pile on. The flashy car, the designer bag, the perfect vacation photos, the constant reminders of success. These aren't just status symbols. They're props. They're a way to hide the insecurity that sits underneath. The truth is, they don't trust that they would still matter if the extras weren't there. They believe the attention, the admiration, and even the envy you're supposed to feel depends entirely on the layers of presentation they've built around themselves. Every brag, every highlight, every timed post is a performance designed to distract from what their terrified people might see otherwise. That fear is subtle but contagious. It drives their actions more than ambition ever could. When they try to provoke jealousy, they're really testing whether their constructed image can hold up in your eyes. If you react, it validates the props. If you don't, the props fall away, and the insecurity underneath is laid bare. What makes this so revealing is how quickly their panic shows when your reaction doesn't match their expectation. The longer they go without getting the emotional response they crave, the more frantic the display becomes. That's because the extras aren't just decoration, they're a shield. Without the applause or envy, they have nothing to stand behind. Every boast, every over-the-top story, every subtle show of status becomes a confession. They fear being seen for who they are without the makeup, the highlights, and the noise. The irony is brutal. In trying to manipulate your perception, they end up exposing the one thing they were desperate to hide: their reliance on external trappings to feel worthy. Your calm, indifferent presence unmasks them completely. The extras, which were supposed to secure attention and admiration, only reveal that their self-assurance is borrowed and conditional. What they hoped would impress you instead reflects their fear that without the extras, they might not be enough. Number 14. They ended up exposing themselves because insecurity always overplays its hand. Insecurity has a way of betraying itself, no matter how carefully someone tries to hide it. When a person attempts to make you jealous, they think they're in control. But what actually happens is the exact opposite. They reveal more about themselves than they ever intended. Every overdone post, every exaggerated story, every subtle flex is a signal that they're desperate for reassurance. They assume that by forcing your reaction, they can assert dominance or superiority, but in reality, their need to manufacture jealousy exposes the cracks in their confidence. The more they try, the clearer it becomes that they are reacting from fear, not strength. Overplaying their hand is instinctive for the insecure. They feel a constant pressure to prove themselves, to ensure that everyone around them sees them as successful, enviable, or impressive. That pressure builds until their actions become excessive, almost theatrical. In their attempt to manipulate perception, they forget that the most powerful statements are subtle, unforced, and grounded in real confidence. The louder they try to impress, the more obvious it is that they're performing for validation rather than living in authenticity. What makes this so revealing is that their effort to provoke jealousy becomes a window into their inner world. The timing, the intensity, the deliberate targeting, it's all a confession. They expose the fact that they are anxious, insecure, and highly dependent on others' reactions to feel adequate. The very act that was supposed to assert power instead becomes a public display of vulnerability, and your neutral, composed presence only magnifies this exposure, showing them that control is an illusion, and that true strength doesn't require manipulation. Ultimately, their overplaying confirms what you may have already sensed. Insecurity cannot help but talk. Every attempt to manufacture envy, to manipulate perception, or to elicit a reaction ends up saying far more about them than anyone else. By trying to dominate the narrative, they unwittingly reveal their fragility, and in doing so, they hand you the truth they were trying to hide. Their insecurity doesn't just show, It screams. When someone tries to make you jealous, what they think is a power move often ends up exposing more about themselves than about you. Every calculated story, every subtle flex, every timed highlight is less about your reaction and more about their own insecurity, their fragile self-image, and their desperate need for validation. What was meant to provoke envy, to shake you or control your emotions, becomes instead a mirror reflecting exactly what they've been hiding: fear, doubt, obsession with perception, and a reliance on attention over substance. Across every point we've explored, the pattern is unmistakable. They mistook your neutrality for envy, showcased what they had to convince themselves it mattered, measured themselves against your potential instead of their reality, and revealed that validation, not achievement, is their real addiction. Their self-image wobbles under comparison. They study you obsessively while assuming control they don't have, and they overplay every hand because insecurity can't resist exposure. They assume your desires mirror theirs, rely on applause rather than integrity, are terrified by your restraint, and fear being seen without the extras they surround themselves with. And ultimately, all of it points to one truth. Their attempts to provoke jealousy don't hide weakness, they scream it. The lesson here is powerful and simple. People who try to manipulate you with jealousy reveal themselves more than you ever could. Their strategies are predictable because they're rooted in fear, not confidence. Your calm, your focus, your independence, and your refusal to participate in their illusions strip away the veneer they've spent so much time constructing. What they hoped would make you react instead exposes exactly how insecure, dependent, and overextended they really are. So remember this: the next time someone tries to make you jealous, see through the act. Observe the confession hidden in their performance. Understand that their envy attempt is a roadmap of their fears, not a measurement of your worth. Hold your peace, stay grounded, and let their insecurity do all the talking. It always does. If this breakdown opened your eyes and gave you that aha moment, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more deep dives like this. Hit the like button, drop a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences, and share this with someone who needs to see the truth behind jealousy. Trust me, the more people understand these patterns, the stronger and calmer they become in a world full of noise and manipulation. Your awareness is your power. Let it grow. Stay awakened, chosen ones.